While the world focuses on Ukraine, Russia, and China and Iran, is our old foe Al Qaeda, growing, looming threat in Afghanistan? Well, we're going to find out here. There's a new article by CNN that suggests that indeed they are not. New U.S. intelligence suggests Al Qaeda unlikely to revive in Afghanistan, but officials warn ISIS threat remains. As you can see, September 8th, 2023. New U.S. intelligence assessment suggests that it is unlikely Al Qaeda will revive in Afghanistan and Pakistan, that counterterrorism operations by the Taliban in Afghanistan have degraded the Islamic State's presence there, said two senior U.S. officials on that Friday. The assessments described by the officials in a briefing to reporters paints an optimistic picture of the overall terrorist presence in Afghanistan. How would they know? They're no longer in Afghanistan, suggesting it has been warning despite the U.S. military withdrawal from the country in 2021. Since the chaotic withdrawals from Afghanistan, and as the U.S. has shifted intelligence resources away from counterterrorism priorities to focus on China and Russia, Biden administration has been at pains to emphasize that it retains over the horizon capabilities to track terrorism threats emanating from South Asia. Still, some U.S. officials have privately raised concerns that as the U.S. has transitioned intelligence assets away from the Middle East and Southeast Asia, because they're now in the Balkans and also in Ukraine and Russia, the Biden administration may struggle to track the threats posed by ISIS, which continues to operate in ungovernable areas in Syria and elsewhere. Well, I wonder who created those scenarios, especially in Libya and Syria. Iraq? ISIS Khorasan, the Afghanistan affiliate of ISIS, has continued to attack high-profile targets inside Afghanistan. ISIS-K attacks have killed and wounded dozens of civilians since the Taliban took over in 2021, part of an attempt to undermine the Taliban's rule and erode public confidence in its assurances of security. And so the officials said that the threat from Al Qaeda, meanwhile, is at its lowest point in decades. Yeah, that's what happens when you kill off and imprison the hierarchy. But just because you cut off the tail of the snake doesn't mean that you cut off the head as well. Yeah, you killed bin Laden. Yeah, you killed Ayman al-Zawahiri. You killed Mohammed Atta. However, you left some parts of the body behind. And those bodies regenerate, especially when you're a terrorist organization that is going to create new leadership. And I'm going to show you. Al Qaeda is at its historical nadir in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Its revival is unlikely, one of the senior officials told reporters in a briefing, adding that the group's ability to threaten the United States from Afghanistan or Pakistan is probably at its lowest point in decades. That is at least partly because Al Qaeda has lost one of its primary targets, U.S. troops, the official said. That wasn't the case in 1996 forward, was it? Because it wasn't so much about troops, it was about Americans worldwide and bin Laden's second fatwa. And so they started bombing U.S. interests in Africa, and then all of a sudden in Yemen, and then inside the United States. The U.S. withdrew its forces from Afghanistan in August of 2021, leaving Al Qaeda without a proving ground to train fighters and operatives. After a U.S. drone strike killed leader Ayman al-Zawahiri in August of 2022, the group was left without leadership talent and strategic guidance, the official added. Taliban claimed at the time they did not know, right? Zawahiri was riding in the Afghan capital, Kabul, when the U.S. targeted him. This is the case with bin Laden in Pakistan for the last 10 years, when U.S. Department of State actually allowed bin Laden to live and didn't give U.S. Special Forces and the CIA the additional 200 troops to actually kill bin Laden and over 200 al-Qaeda fighters when they were surrounded near the White Mountains between the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan in 2001. Bin Laden went on to live for the next 10 years. And the reason why, most likely, is because they needed bin Laden and al-Qaeda alive to justify their invasion of Iraq. That's what happened here. Now, here's the issue. Is al-Qaeda really a threat? Are they a threat from afar? Are they growing inside Afghanistan? Well, these reports about Al Qaeda being um, a growing threat from within the country is actually nothing new. And incidentally enough, just this past 22nd anniversary of the attacks, it shows that Al Qaeda is still creating propaganda videos bemoaning about um, the attacks, and that these the growing number of Al Qaeda affiliates in Afghanistan indeed is true. And let me show you an article that was written back in 2014 by counterterrorism expert Bruce Riedel. Al Qaeda's next comeback could be Afghanistan and Pakistan. As you can see, January of 2014. Al Qaeda has staged a remarkable comeback in Iraq last year. Former National Security Advisor Jim Jones has called Al Qaeda's resistance this year. Most, if not all, American forces, those of the Allies and NATO-led International Security Assistance Force, will finally come home from Afghanistan. Will Al Qaeda have another resistance in South Asia? And basically, it goes on to say a lot of things. But here, let me bring you to the article here that shows that back in 2014, Bruce Riedel, one of the nation's leading counterterrorism experts, expected a revival in Afghanistan when America leaves. It is an argument for working with Kabul to keep a robust U.S. counterterrorism capability in Afghanistan after 2014 to deal with threats both on Afghan territory and from safe havens like Abbottabad across the border for the foreseeable future. Over the longer term, America will need a more realistic and tough policy toward Pakistan. That didn't happen. We should continue to engage the government and the army seriously, but with much reduced expectations. We should help those Pakistanis who are ready to fight extremism, but not expect miracles. As former Pakistani ambassador to the U.S., Hussein Haqqani, has written, it is time to put aside our magnificent delusions about Pakistani-American partnership for good. We will need to protect our own interests there without their help. Only that will prevent another Al Qaeda renaissance in the most dangerous country in the world, Pakistan. Because Pakistan actually is the conduit for extremism, because most of the country itself is led by a growing, this long-standing problem of extremism, not just in the towns like Abbottabad and Islamabad, home of the Taliban. That's the birth and nadir nexus of the Taliban, and groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed, which is an offshoot based in Lahore, fighting against the Indian government, which was created by the Pakistan's intelligence arm, the ISI. So when you have a bunch of extremists in the intelligence apparatus, and they've been having a long-standing history training Islamic militants. Take a look what they did with the Taliban in the early 1990s to a CIA operation called Operation Cyclone, where we gave billions of dollars to Saudi and U.S. financing to these Arab and Afghan Mujahideen groups, which later formed into groups like Al-Qaeda, Abu Sayyaf, and Jemaah Islamiyah in Indonesia, Abu Sayyaf located in Pakistan. And the Taliban, of course, in the mid-90s, which, 2 civil wars after the U.S. Left the country because the Soviets were defeated, which killed more people than the 10-year war when Soviets invaded. So, U.S. foreign policy is what creates the motivation for these groups to attack U.S. Interests abroad and here. And that's the whole issue here, is right. The U.S. foreign policy is the problem. It's not because, we're a secular nation or a Christian-led nation, right? It has nothing to do with it. has everything to do that we're allied with Israel, which is the biggest problem regarding the Palestinian problem. And they're not making it any better when you have Israel having the most right-wing nationalist government in its history, and the U.S. basically ignoring all the international crimes that are happening in the country, as well as the U.S. disposition toward countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Bahrain, Pakistan, and what we did to these countries in the last 20 years. You think that just goes away? Millions of people died, including Iraq, which had nothing to do with the attacks in 9/11. Now, there's a group from the American Enterprise Institute called Critical Threats Project in 2009. Their objective is to inform and educate policymakers, the intelligence and military communities about the nuance and scale of threats to America's security. And this is a pretty up-to-date group. And what they did was they created an article which was published this year called "The State of Al Qaeda and ISIS in 2023." Now, what they did was they said that, and also what this group said was that Al Qaeda in Afghanistan is rebuilding. This is in direct contradiction to the Pentagon stating that they aren't a threat anymore. So now who do you believe, right? You have analysts from the United Nations who wrote a report this spring that put the number of core Al Qaeda members in Afghanistan somewhere between 30 to 60, and the number of fighters in the country at approximately 400. So all right, now for those who are saying, what does the report say? Let's show you the critical reports, which I'm going to, of course, let you read in the bottom of the description. So, I'm not, just take my word. The Salafi jihadi threat persists across Africa, the Middle East, and into Asia. There you have it. Al Qaeda and Islamic State affiliated groups are engaged in local conflicts and have sought ways to strengthen on the ground within popular insurgencies. Their focus on expanding in the Muslim world has not replaced aspirations to strike the West, however. These groups that once demonstrated or sought to develop transnational attack capabilities still seek to target the United States and Europe, creating an ongoing requirement for counterterrorism activities. What I'm going to do is I'm going to basically, make this bigger so you can see it yourself. Salafi jihadi groups are set to strengthen it, and counterterrorism pressure lessens and local conditions worsen. This is exactly how fundamentalism works. When you decimate a country so badly that poverty is basically everywhere, and when you already have a fundamentalist group basically subjugating women and intellectuals like the Taliban are doing, this creates poverty. Poverty breeds extremism. The illiterates are the ones reading, the ones listening to the wrong people because they don't know how to read. If you take a look at the history of radical fundamentalists, especially in Al Qaeda, they don't read the Quran. Their imams, their radical clerics, their caliphs are basically reading from the hadiths, teaching them about Ibn Taymiyyah, teaching them about Abdul Ibn Abdul al-Wahhab, Salafism, un-Islamic teachings. That's how you create these groups, especially when you have groups that are taking advantage of these youths who have nothing. They don't have freedom of the press. They don't have freedom to work. They don't have freedom to govern, freedom to think, because they're being told by the leaderships and corrupt governments. Then you have foreign policy directing what the country can do and cannot do. You have economic sanctions. This is all a breeding ground. It's not just the United States. You have coalition partners too: Germany, France, Canada, even the Gulf, which is Western-backed U.S. Yeah, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, right? And you have countries that breed into extremism, like Turkey, Pakistan, and the Gulf, right? Egypt. So it's not like we could just walk away from a 20-year war without feeling the ramifications later. We didn't learn our lesson in Afghanistan in 1989 when the Soviets were defeated. We walked away. What happened? All the funding and militant logistical support to radical groups came back to bite us because foreign policymakers and analysts didn't do their job, or maybe they did and saw the growing threat and said this is going to be the new war, which is going to be the war on terrorism. That replaced the Cold War. Yeah, that sounds about right, doesn't it? I mean, that's a coinkydink. Now, what's going to happen in the Balkans? What's going to happen in Ukraine? All the billions of dollars that we spent a lot more money than we did with Operation Cyclone in Ukraine. You think those right-wing groups are selling those weapons in the black market to groups like the Taliban and Al Qaeda in Afghanistan? I would think so, because that's exactly what happened when we sent Stinger missiles to Afghanistan and also weapons to Pakistan. Hmm? Those weapons found their way to Al Qaeda in the Sudan, because when U.S. troops were in Mogadishu, you remember that, you old fogies? A lot of those missiles and Stinger missiles went to groups like under Mohammed Farah, who is his group was trained under Al Qaeda in Egypt. The Al Qaeda Egypt group, led by militant leaders like Abu Ubaidah al-Banshiri and Abu Hafs al-Masri, also known as Mohammed Atef, and Ali Mohammed. Remember him? The triple agent for CIA, FBI, and Al Qaeda? Yeah. He was training those troops how to use missiles, and those Stinger missiles went to shoot down Black Hawk helicopters. So here's a report that basically says that Al Qaeda is basically a growing threat in Afghanistan. So you really, look, I'm not here to spread gossip. I'm not here to spread conspiracy theories. I'm just here to report the facts. That's all I'm here for. I'm not here to raise the threat level either. And also, let's take a look at the reward for this individual. Abu al-Rahman al-Maghrebi. Abd al-Rahman al-Maghrebi, also known as Mohammed Abatea, is a senior leader in the Al-Qaeda terrorist group organization. He is the director of Al-Qaeda's media wing, Al-Sahab. He is the son-in-law and senior advisor to Al-Qaeda's former overall leader, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri. There is a $7 million reward. It is alleged that al-Maghrebi is in Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, I close by saying that we need geopolitical and counterterrorism experts to hammer home the threat of the Taliban and Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, and that we need to send counterterrorism policymakers to the country, working with the government on keeping tabs on these groups. Because 10 years from now, what's going to happen is, as long as we engage in other areas of the world, ruining other countries' lives, because that's what the United States basically does, right? It's all going to come back and bite us in the butt, because all the billions of dollars we're sending Ukraine is suddenly going to make its way, some of it, in Afghanistan. And they're not far from each other. The Ukraine and Afghanistan are not that far, especially when you think about it, right? What I'm going to show you is a map from Ukraine to Afghanistan. There's Ukraine. Here's Afghanistan. I'll short myself. Here it is. Ukraine, Afghanistan. You don't even need to take the rivers. The Black Sea, and it's right here, right there. And look who they have to go through. Georgia, Azerbaijan, Iran, or go north to Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan. Well, I wonder what's over here. Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, the Balkans, the countries which have Al-Qaeda affiliates in them. So that's the latest news. I will continue to do up-to-date videos to keep you informed without prejudice and bias. Okay, everybody, see you in the next video. Take care of yourself.